Okay, so it's just a kind of like an abstract representation of the practice that I mentioned that I'm trying to build and working on is kind of like to use architecture tools to represent what is invisible. And I do it because I do believe that, and it's quite obvious, especially for you guys in architecture, it's less present that we live in an extremely complex world where different realities overlap, and what constitutes our world is like biological, climatic, chemical, geological realities, and actually they all overlap and mix. So it's kind of like, for me, it was quite clear that being an architect, you cannot really stay within the traditional boundaries of architecture in order to address urgent issues that we are facing nowadays. Like all the actually abstract forces and something what we are talking about here as well, like colonialism or geopolitics, economics, they do manifest in a physical space. So that's kind of like they do have a very physical presence, and that could be also exposed, of course. I was curious about that still when I was living in Ukraine, and currently you see the slide from the same building in Kiev, the one which was like first planned during the times of Stalin, and then how it's actually changed during the times of Khrushchev, because it was a different political system, and like during the Khrushchev they were fighting against excesses, and that's actually resulted in architecture. And for me, I was also curious, okay, that you really see this politics within the physical space, but could it actually also work other way around? Oh, sorry. And this also actually was, besides architecture, the politics were also exercised through the landscape. And so the slide what you're looking at, it's kind of like the representation of the idea of Stalin when he was redesigning like the areas of Crimea and Donetsk, that in order to create a different type of landscape, but at the same time, it's actually also was a strategic political plan for and for actually and for colonialism, you know, and for repression or a certain kind of like at that time Soviet Union ideas in order to control population. But also it's from the perspective of okay, that actually through the landscape you can really design the politics. That's actually was kind of something maybe new at that time. And what we also, I'm originally Ukrainian, well, Ukrainian still, like have Ukrainian passport. And that like what you can see also with the war in Ukraine nowadays, so that also very large infrastructural and landscape structures play a very crucial role within this war. And so something like natural resources, but also like the critical energetic infrastructure are very important, and within the context of Ukraine, but will become more and more important for the conflicts in the future, let's say. And of course, all of this also results very directly in the landscape, and everyone, I think, heard about this Novakakhovka Dam, which was currently destroyed, and then it's like Azovstal, that it's like a infrastructure and the landscape where you can, that's also a representation of many different systems, because it was a storage for the metal and the steel plant, and it was a port. So it's a very interesting area, but I will not go too deep into that. Then there is also this North Crimean channel, which actually provided water to Crimea. It was like a structure to facilitate water to Crimea. With the breakage of the dam, it will not function anymore that much, but also like what I'm fascinated in is that, yeah, during the very beginning of the war, that actually people themselves in the village, one of the villages in Ukraine, they used kind of like this infrastructural facilities and like breaking them in order to not to let the army occupy their territory. So these are some certain of my fascination, and what's something where I think that in the landscape represented are different, invisible forces. And I would like to talk about this topic on a concrete project that I recently completed that already Anya mentioned. So it was exhibited in the Het Nieuw Institute. And the name is No Innocent Landscape. And it's kind of like a project in which I tried to expose this mechanism of the power colonialism exploitation through the spatial tools and through the narrative. For this project, I chose the site of the crash of the MH17 plane. It's a plane which was going from Schiphol in Amsterdam to Malaysia. Right, and some people like some people were Australian there, and also like from mainly everyone was Dutch, let's say. So this crash site also I think was quite interestingly positioned between the two different regions within Ukraine, like self-proclaimed regions of the Donetsk and Luhansk. And I will come back to that a bit later. So for me, that site also represented the interconnection between the Dutch area and the Ukrainian. So that you kind of like could see that here the borders kind of like do not make sense. So that kind of what belongs also to the Netherlands is not really just laying within its borders. So it's kind of like this plane became interconnection between different countries and exposed how borders do not really make sense. And to me, it's also quite a personal area because I spent my summers close to, like in a similar region as that one, like close to it, mining village. And I do remember this landscape from my childhood, which is quite characteristic due to the certain like earth excavated earth hills, but also I remember that spending a lot of time under the water. There is like a river, and when the MH17 was shot, it was my time when I just came to the Netherlands actually. And for me it was that it was firstly was a revolution in Ukraine, then it was annexation of the Crimea, and then MH17 was shot. So for me it was kind of quite traumatic period in my life. And when MH17 was shot, I kind of like also had a flashback of how I remember this landscape of that region being innocent, and at the same time how it was changing throughout the years with the war and with also excavation of different resources, and how much more it was becoming more polluted and polluted. And so at that time, like also with the war, but also at that time that I was feeling like that it's kind of like for me this reality of a controlled space, or that also being an architect, you know, like in thinking that you are controlling the space, like or how we here in West think that we do have control. I really lost that reality, so I really felt like everything was kind of so there were a lot of different forces coming towards, and I just had to navigate between those ones, and it also reflected in this project, which I will discuss further on. So that like how my world became very confused, the site and the project represents it as well. So the plane was scattered in the area of 50 square kilometers, and so it was also connecting different landscapes and exposing what's actually happening within that area. So the landscape, because everyone died in the plane, so no one survived. So you could say that there was no human witness, and the landscape became the witness telling the story of that event. And the pieces of the plane, they were transported back to the Netherlands, and then they were reconstructed in order to recreate what was invisible, actually. So the this notion of the invisibility is very present within this project. And for me, like kind of this plane, this image was quite, don't know if that's the right word, inspiration, but you can see here that design exactly can be this tool to show what happened or what is invisible. So that's it's kind of like this plane is a metaphor for the I named design, but it's also art, and and this plane became this also magnifying lens. It's became the witness itself, which as I said, like that it's exposed what kind of how many more layers in the area are. So it's kind of like an interconnection between illegal minings. It's a lot of pollution of the nature. So it's one of the most polluted areas in the world due to the mining as well, but also wars. It's interconnected shafts underground. It's gas pipes which are there. It's also the area, as I said, it's between Donetsk and Luhansk, and at that time they proclaimed actually an international border between each other, and at the same time this border is also a river. And what is interesting about that area is that this Donetsk and Luhansk area underground, they are interconnected with these mines, and the landscape of the Luhansk and Donetsk is it's a bit different. They have different heights, and so if one government, because they had a very different governmental control, so if one government doesn't control properly the water, it's the other area gets flooded, and that's actually what is happening and why pollution is spreading. And there are also like certain bunkers, nuclear bunkers, so it's very dangerous, and this water also brings methane and close to the air, so it's becomes a really nature disaster area. So as I said, like this river, the Seversky Donetsk River, it's actually, it runs from the Russian Federation. It enters the area of Ukraine. It enters this area of the Donetsk and Luhansk, that it gets polluted there. It gets back to the Russian Federation, bringing pollution there, and eventually it ends up in the Black Sea basin. So first Azov Sea, then Black Sea, spreading this actually pollution internationally. So here are some schemes of this river. So here you can see kind of like an indication of the border and this area where the MH17 was shot, leading to the Black Sea, and how it becomes more and more polluted with years. And so what you could see are like, if you think about this project, this actually this area is really a representation of how our traditional understanding of the division between sky, surface, and then the ground becomes mixed up, because like with the crash of the plane going down, you know, like, and interconnected with what is underground, and at the same time the illegal mines of the coal, but also all other minerals bringing the earth up. And so if you usually perceive the borders vertical, here the border becomes actually horizontal, so between just air and the solid matter underground. So it's it really shows how ridiculous our borders are, because also this the human borders are. Yeah. And to add to that story is that currently, like with the war in Ukraine, the European Union started like to fasten its transition towards the green energy. So and before the war, the start of the war in Ukraine was found very large amounts of lithium, but also other critical minerals which are required for this green energy transition. And so if you see look at the global map, Ukraine is one of actually largest countries which have these critical minerals in the world. And this is like that area where this Donetsk and Luhansk, but it spreads also throughout all eastern Ukraine. And the tests, for example, for the lithium were made in Mariupol. So it's actually directly connects to how the occupation of Ukraine is happening. And also, if you think about this on the global scale, and this is not really something that I made up, but it's known within the within Brussels and within the political arena, that due to the transition from the fossil fuels to the green energy, which require different types of critical minerals, our world political arena gonna change as well, because the fossil fuels, for example, they are positioned in large amounts in many areas of the world, but critical minerals actually positioned only as few areas in the world that would be efficient to mine. And it means that countries actually like Africa, like Uganda, etc., which have these critical minerals, all of a sudden start to play a very important role. And Europe itself at the moment doesn't have enough of these critical minerals, and so it was actually looking for them very consciously. So you also could question why Europe is so present in Ukraine, of course. But what is interesting, of course, about these critical minerals, maybe you know it already, but it's also quite a polluting process. So at the same time, we go to the different types of political structures of the world, though it brings the same type of pollution and colonialism, because we start to outsource our energy to different countries. We still mine different types of minerals in the countries. So how do we go on? And that's something that I was questioning within this project. And you also have to understand that I was in quite a different mental state, because the war just started. And for me, it was also a lot of disappointment of how we as human maybe act. And I thought that, I also saw this this kind of like a phrase by Val Harari about Ukraine, that it's actually like that area which questions, is change possible of how humanity is acting nowadays? And what I thought is that I wanted to think of the project or of this location within Ukraine as a kind of like this axiom. So to think of it in a way that, what if we imagine that the way how we act now, like how we structure our politics, where we base it on the human needs. So also you can see that our political institutions are really failing to address the complexity of issues. So it really does not work. And so what we base our politics on what is invisible. So we turn it sort of like upside down. And the project became this kind of like an axiom to deconstruct what or show how much more complex the issues, for example, in Ukraine, how they are interconnected and between different scales and between different countries, between solid and fluid. And it's quite maybe a sharp jump, but so what I proposed within this project is that I kind of created like these different axioms based on the facts and the conditions of the existing location in the Donetsk and Luhansk. But at the same time, these kind of axioms, they were changing the way currently these dogmas within that locations are function. So one of the interventions, there are several of them, could be much more, but for example, there were like this close the sky. It's based on the ridiculous idea that human can control the sky, you know, while we all know that the chemicals, they travel within the area, but it's also based on the requirements of, inspired by, let's say, requirements of Ukrainians and statements like to close the sky. And then there are also other ones, like, for example, like a border control, like what you can see here. So if usually the border, as I said, like the border is usually vertical, here in this area, the border becomes horizontal, and that border control, if you go from A to B, here it became like an elevator interconnecting air and underground. So it's kind of like between fiction, between the reality, and between the poetry. And so I created like this kind of a world or this landscape based also on the narrative that these 298 dreams, it's people who died within this plane, like so their dreams that they landed on this territory and they started to interact it with and change it in a way how actually humans maybe would want to live, so according to our dreams. And it became like this territory of the negotiation between sky, soil, and underground, so making this understanding of better understanding between these kind of stratifications. And then I also, like, within this project, I thought, like, okay, how do I represent within the exhibition these narratives? So it was kind of like it's the design was the narrative, so I made these short poetic stories, and I wanted to represent them physically. And I was, as I said earlier, like I was inspired by the plane and that it was reconstructed from different pieces. And also that was, at the same time, that's how I felt how the healing for me within this process had to be, that I had to reconstruct myself from completely different broken pieces. And so I mined like this metal, like scrap metal, and then I bind together these different types of pieces, and I created kind of a representation of this of the storyline. So what you are looking at now, it's the exhibition room, which was at the Ethnio Institute. So it's divided on this air and the underground, like black and white, and it's kind of like becomes this landscape. So it's it's kind of an immersive experience, because I used also sound, smell there, and light, besides these storylines. And just to show maybe like quickly, I think images do not really represent everything well, but so these objects which kind of talk about these different narratives, they are addressing underground and then what is happening in the sky at the same time. So this is, for example, like a water control, and this is the close the sky sculptural representation. That's a cleaning wheel, which relates to the water and its pollution. I could, of course, name all of them and tell stories about that. There was also devoted some to the victims of the MH17. So it's kind of like the room itself was a representation of this flight recorder that was kind of like never, this human witness that I said that was kind of like never opened. So that, the room itself had to tell the story that you feel it. And there was also a video. And if you like, I can also show a small video from the exhibition, if that's interesting, or maybe if you have questions, let me know. This is, I think, my last slide from the presentation. And
yeah, I think it will be good if you show the clip, so kind of like to give a better vision of the show.
Okay, let's try that, guys. You see now the screen, right? It's black. And can you see it now? Okay. In current conflicts, architecture can no longer assume control with its normal tools and thinking. But for that, a new language has to be developed. I perceive the project as an axiom that is used in mathematics to help bypass the blockade. In this case, it is about the blockade of the impossibility to resolve current conflicts from the human perspective. The axiom that truth without proof has become the project. In this project, I wanted to set free the tactical logic of the place in the form of architectural proposals, which are no longer limited to its situation, but become free to address the real issues and to give shape to the crucial interactions of the visible and invisible processes.
The mineral-rich regions of Donetsk and Luhansk are places of many abandoned dreams, unacknowledged people, and disputed human values. 298 dreams crashed into this territory and started to interact with the space and other realms. The territory became a ground of negotiation between sky, soil, and underground, between non-human. On this specific site, global issues are becoming less abstract. A true arena of political institutions.
Damaged places and destroyed objects, reality and dreams are pieced together to create a new narrative. Okay, yeah, that's that is that's a short, short clip from the exhibition. There was like a film of 19 minutes, like telling this this story. And I can imagine that not everything is clear, so feel free to ask any questions.